Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Stevenage Vineyard Church. Good to see you. Nice to meet you again on this fine, sunny Sunday morning. If you're new to us, do click on like and subscribe so you can keep in touch with all the content. My name is Daniel Barnes. I had to think about that one. I had the privilege of being the lead pastor here at the Stevenage Vineyard Church. I'm assuming that there are lots of kids and families starting to join us, munching on their Rocky Road. What is it? Is it a cake? Is it a biscuit? What's Rocky Road? Whatever it is, I'm sure you're enjoying it. Hopefully you had good fun. I would like some, so if anyone does have any extras, then our address is Unit 1, the Orbital Centre at Cockerell Close. So I do try and make use of my position in front of the camera to prey on your guilt and get extra food. So if you do have any extra, do feel free to swing it my way as well. But hopefully things aren't too hyper at all the families and all the households across Stevenage. So if you're new here, what normally happens is we have about 15 minutes of worship. There'll be a short break after Stu's finished, and there'll be some announcements, some information about things that are going on and are happening. Then you'll come back to me, and then we'll have a message for about 20 minutes as well. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pray. We're going to give this morning over to God, and we'll see what happens. God, we thank you that we have another day to come to you and to look up towards you, Lord. As we gaze towards you this morning, Jesus, we ask that you meet us where we're at, wherever we're sitting, wherever we are, whenever we are. As we look towards you, Jesus, touch our hearts, speak to us, provoke us, challenge us. Let us hear your still small voice that sometimes we're not quite sure about, but give us the courage to respond to it, Lord Jesus. We thank you, God. Amen.
With all my heart I say I love you, and it's my reward to stand before you. And with all my heart, and with all my soul, and with all my strength I worship you. You are my heart's desire, nothing compares to you. Jesus, my one desire, I worship you. Passionate hearts on fire, singing this place for you, bowing before your throne to honor you. The life I live, I'm living for you. And with every breath I say I love you. And with all my heart, and with all my soul, and with all my strength I worship you. Oh, you are my heart's desire, and nothing compares to you. Jesus, my one desire, I worship you. Passionate hearts on fire, singing this place for you, bowing before your throne to honor you. And every nation, all of creation, every heart will sing your praise. With celebration, songs of salvation, bless your name. And every nation, all of creation, every heart will sing your praise. With celebration, songs of salvation, we proclaim that you are my heart's desire. Nothing compares to you. Jesus, my one desire, I worship you. Passionate hearts on fire, singing this place for you, bowing before your throne to honor you. You are my heart's desire, nothing compares to you. Jesus, my one desire, I worship you. Passionate hearts on fire, and singing this place for you, bowing before your throne to honor you. And we honor you. We honor you. Found in your name the power to save, with only a whisper mountains shake. Jesus, our hope and strength. You made a way, unlock these chains. Here in your presence, strongholds break. The love you gave, we give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. There on a tree, merciful King, broken and shamed for all to see. The Father laid down His Son. From darkness to light, and death lost to life, heaven and earth will join and sing. Jesus has overcome. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. Yes, you deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. And you deserve it all. With every breath that's in my lungs, my heart cries out, to you belongs the glory. And through every loss or victory, my soul will rise to only bring you glory. Bring you glory. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. Yes, we give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. Deep within my heart, I know you won. I know you've overcome. Even in the dark, when I'm undone, I still believe it. I live by faith and not by sight. Sometimes miracles take time. And while I wait, I will worship. Lord, I worship your name. And while I wait, I will trust you. Lord, I trust you all the same. When I fall apart, you are my strength. Help me not forget, seeing every scar. You make me whole. You're my healer, and I live by faith and not by sight. Sometimes miracles take time. Live by faith. I live by faith and not by sight. Sometimes miracles, they take time. While I wait, I will worship. Lord, I worship your name. While I wait, I will trust you. Lord, I trust you all the same. While I wait, I will worship. Lord, I worship your name. While I wait, I will trust you. Lord, I trust you all the same. 'Cause you're faithful every day. Your promises remain, and you're faithful every day, and your promises remain. Oh, you're faithful every day, and your promises remain. You're faithful every day, and your promises remain. I don't understand it, I will worship with my pain. You are God, you're so worthy, you are with me all the way. While I wait, I will worship, Lord, I'll worship your name. Though I don't have all the answers, still I trust you all the same. While I wait, I will worship, Lord, I'll worship your name. While I wait, I will trust you, Lord, I'll trust you all the same. 'Cause you're faithful every day, your promises remain, and you're faithful every day, and your promises remain. Thank you, God, your promises remain, and your promises remain, and you're faithful every day, and your promises remain. Your love reaches for us all, it stretches round the world, walks through every wall. And your love searches for the lost, it makes the foulest clean, it reaches even me. And you love, you love, you love, you love us all the same. Your love sees the broken heart and binds up every wound, and steps into the dark. Your love finds the left behind, holds the poor and weak, and fights for even me. And you love, you love, you love us all the same. You love, you love, you love us all the same. You love, you love, you love, you love us all the same. You love, you love, you love us all the same. You love, you love, you love us all the same. You love, you love, you love, you love us all the same. You welcome the lover, the hater, believer, the doubter, the mighty, the broken, the pure and profane, the selfish, the giver, the loser, the winner, the righteous, the sinner, all the same. You welcome the lover, the hater, believer, the doubter, the mighty, the broken, the pure and profane, and the selfish, the giver, the loser, the winner, the righteous, the sinner, all the same. You love, you love, you love us all the same. You love, you love, you love us all the same. You love, you love, you love, you love us all the same. You love, you love, you love us all the same. You love, you love, you love us all the same. You love, you love, you love, you love us all the same. 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 You welcome the lover, the hater, believer, the doubter, the mighty, the broken, the pure and profane, the selfish, the giver, the loser and the winner, the righteous, the sinner, all the same. You love us 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 all the same. Holy Spirit, come. Holy Spirit, come. We invite you in. We invite you in. Holy Spirit, come. More of you, Lord. Holy Spirit, come. Thank you, God. Holy Spirit, come. Holy Spirit, come. No matter where we are, touch us, Lord. Holy Spirit, come.
Good morning. Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed that. You've seen some information, some announcements going through there. Do pay attention to those. This is normally the part of the service where we give our tithes and our offerings. You can still do that. The details would have come up on the screen. We have a little contactless station here as well. So there are many ways you can do that as part of the worship, part of our lifestyle of giving to Jesus. How good was last week? Did you enjoy last week? It was so nice to see people and sunshine. Fortune favours the bold, I find. So it was great. We really got lucky there on the day, certainly, and it was just so nice to be able to worship together and spend some time celebrating Easter together and see many sort of new faces and familiar faces, and it was a real highlighter of how long it's actually been. I think seeing some children who are in carry cots now are walking around, and some people who had nice long silky hair and it's now scraggly and a little bit grey and all that sort of stuff. You know who I'm talking about. But it was just so nice just to be with each other again, just to spend time as a community, as a family, as a church. So thank you for all those who are able to come along. Obviously, we're hoping to give you information as soon as we can, but we can only play the cards that are dealt with us at the moment, so we're trying to steal some different cards from different places so we can play some more cards. That was a bad analogy, sorry. A few bits of information. You will have seen the Stevenage Money Debt Advice. I've launched a Facebook page this week. That's part of just awareness, letting people know that we're around, that we're available, that people can access support and help if they need it. So if you've seen that, do give it a share, do give it a like. That's just our way of, on social media, of being able to be more accessible for people that are in need as well. And speaking of some of the compassion things we do as well, we're excited to be launching Baby Shed tomorrow. So it's been a long time coming with COVID and everything that sort of happened in between. We've sort of been pushing ahead as much as we can with the space that we have. We've finally been able to do that as well. So it's the first step in a journey of many steps of being able to help people and show God's love and compassion in a really practical way and create windows in which we can just bless people, just show them kindness. So we're excited for that to be starting. I'm sure you hear about that as we go along. Carly Barnes is going to be coordinating that as well. So if you have any questions, you want to help out, you want to donate, volunteer, or whatever, do get into contact with Carly Barnes, not me, and she will direct you where to go and how you can help it and so on. If you're not sure, just message the office and we'll happily sort of pass your details on as well. Babyshed at stevenage-vineyard.co.uk for those of you who have a pen and paper ready to write down an email at a moment's notice. We're going to be carrying on a series that we started a couple of weeks ago about living well, about what it means to live well, about what that looks like in a modern day environment, in the context of how we live out some of these biblical principles in our practical, physical sort of day lives. The things that we can do, the habits that we can take on, the characteristics and traits that we can absorb in order to live a stable and a balanced life, a life that pleases and honours not just God but those around us as well, so that people can see what is in us. And today I want to look at one particular verse, to be fair, and I've titled it God's Template, because there are many gems actually in the Bible. You'd be pleasantly surprised to hear, but there's this particular verse. It's quite often missed. It's quite often not seen, partly because it's in the Old Testament, but it's for me it's God's template on how we should live as people. And how we should conduct ourselves in whatever context, whatever environment we're in. And so I just want to take this morning just expounding on that verse. If you have a Bible, it's in the book of Micah, which is in the Old Testament, which on my Bible is at page 825. That's a Christian joke if you get that. It will probably be a completely different page or on your app or whatever it is. So I'm old school now, aren't I? But it's in the book of Micah, chapter 6, verse 8, and we're going to be looking at God's template for what it looks like to live well in this world. And if you've found it already, well done, but it says, God, he has shown you, O man, what is good. What does God require of you? And this is what God requires of us, to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. 3 things there. To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And I just want to take some time just unpacking these 3 things in the next 20 minutes or so. The first one, it says to act justly. Have you ever noticed how people's hearts tend to soften when we talk about what the church's work does with the poor and the broken and the needy? I've noticed how when you talk about some of the things that we do, how people's heart just sort of change. It softens towards the church, what we do. When I tell them the stories of food literally being multiplied and coming in from avenues that we had no idea existed, when we didn't have enough, and then almost miraculously it sort of comes in through the door by a person we've never met. When we talk about the stories of people who've discovered Jesus through it, and they've been on the receiving end of this kindness and compassion they've never experienced before, on a complete lack of judgment, just being accepted, as the song we've just sort of sung, as anyone from any walk of life can come in and can experience that. I've noticed how when you practice justice, when you act out justice, when you live it out, when you intentionally do it, how people's hearts soften towards often what has been made, often they've been conditioned to view the church and God is in a very sort of hard way. And to some extent, they're justified in that feeling. But when you talk about compassion, when you talk about justice, people's heart change. In my mind, social justice, how I define social justice, it's targeted compassion. And when we do that, when we act that out, it's amazing how people's hearts change. I want to read out a passage in Isaiah chapter 58. And this is a passage where people are looking, how do we God, how do we find you? Where are you? How can we see your presence in our lives? How can we know where you are? And this is God giving his manifesto, if you like, to the nation of Israel as they're seeking this out, as they're searching this out. And this is in Isaiah chapter 58. I'm going to throw a few scriptures at you this morning, so jot them down and be aware. But this is Isaiah chapter 58, verse 6. And this is the nation of Israel have been saying, where are you, God? We tried this, we've tried that. We can't see you. Where are you? And God replies, this is the kind of fasting I have chosen, because they previously been talking about fasting. This is the fasting I have chosen, to loose the chains of injustice, to untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke. Is it not to share your food with the hungry, and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe him, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood. That's where he starts. And then he says, then your light will break forth like the dawn. Then your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call upon the Lord, and he will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, here I am. But it first starts with justice. First, it starts with seeking out the oppressed and the broken. And this isn't just some random sort of scripture in the Bible. This isn't just sort of something I've just sort of pulled out. When Jesus was on the earth and he literally first introduced himself, came on the scene, no one knew who he was just some guy. He got up on the temple and he gave his script reading, as many of the men did in that area. And his opening gambit, the gauntlet he threw down before, as everyone heard him for the first time, he read a scripture, and it said, this is what Jesus read, his coming of age, if you like, his opening scene. He said, the Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour, or the blessing of God. And that was where he started. Was it to build the church? No. Was it to restore Israel? No. Was it to talk about the end times? No. Was it to have good worship? No. To preach good news to the poor. To proclaim freedom to those who are bound up, to those who are held back. Recovery of sight for the blind who can't see God's heart and God's hand on their life to release the oppressed. And that's where he started. That's where he chose. And the very first is God's statement for living well is to act justly. And I found that justice is one of the values of God. It's part of the DNA that's mixed up with God. And when we take on what is right, when we do what is just, we absorb God's character. Whether you know God or not, whether if you're doing what's right and what's just, you'll find that God's character becomes part of you, who you are. Wisdom is wisdom, wherever you find it from. Justice is justice, wherever you get it from. It's funny, isn't it, how we instinctively know what justice is. I've seen so many people get angry about things that I said about them that aren't true, or they see things that have happened, they see someone treated a certain way. There's an instinctual sense of justice. It's almost like it's written on our heart. And as we apply ourselves to that, we absorb God's character. And with God's character comes God's blessing. And often you find that people who live that way find themselves blessed. And justice goes hand in hand with the blessing of God. And we see that not just outlined in the characters in the Bible, but throughout history as well. Basil of Caesarea, I'm sure none of you will know. He was a bishop in the early church in the 300s. I think that's a time frame. He established orphanages and schools and poorhouses. He was best known for developing some of the first fully staffed hospitals at that time. But he was also a servant of God. He's also a preacher. He was also, the reason for it was to show God's love. And this is what he said about justice. He said, a man who has 2 coats or 2 pairs of shoes when his neighbor has none, has his neighbor's coat and shoes. It evidences a lack of grace in his life. The redistribution of wealth is not the point, is what he said. The revealing of faith is the point. Very early on, he caught the heart of what God was about. He understood God's mission statement. John Chrysostom, another bishop in the early church, I'm sure many of you would have never heard about. He was known as the Golden Mouth Orator, and he was a leader in the church. This is what he said about serving the poor, about serving the broken. He established many sort of charities and hospitals at that time when it was sort of unheard of. He said, the essence of the gospel is not concern for the poor, but it certainly provokes that concern. In fact, it's without that concern that the essence of the gospel hasn't actually been grasped at all. He was saying that they're one of the same, they're joined. John Huss, who came about later, 100 years before the Reformation, as he was about to be burned on the stake for his beliefs, known as a firebrand, a preacher contradicting the overwhelming thought of the day. 100 years before he's about to be burned at the stake, he gave a prophecy saying, 100 years from now, someone will come whose words you will not be able to extinguish, and they will give you the truth, and you will not be able to touch that. And 100 years later, Martin Luther came across the scene and hammered his 95 Theses, which led to the whole Reformation. That's just a little tidbit about who John Huss was, but he was a dynamic preacher. He was known as completely shook the societal norms of that day, an evangelist and a reformer who paved the way for the Reformation to happen. But here's what he said about giving to the poor, about reaching the broken. He said, doubt must be cast on fruitless lives. Ouch. Doubt must be cast on fruitless lives. Profession of faith must be followed by deeds of charity. Otherwise, that profession is false. Doubt must be cast on fruitless lives, and profession must be followed by deeds of charity. Otherwise, that profession is false. You can see why it caused so much trouble. And he believed that passionately. And essentially, and I've said this before in John 17, it's the world that will ultimately judge the church. It's the world that will say if they can see Jesus or not. And like I said, in the same way that justice is something that's instinctual, people know Jesus. They understand Jesus if they see it. In the heart of hearts, they know if it's true or not. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12 says, live such good lives among the world, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they can see that you're doing right. And that's how we're called to live as we act justly, as this first part of the template teaches us how to act justly. And the efforts of overcoming injustice must be tied to spiritual transformation. Only God can get to the root of oppression. Only God can really get to the root of injustice, because only God can truly get to the heart of a man. If you've ever seen someone transformed as they've experienced Jesus, you know exactly what I mean. And sometimes we look at politics as that needs to be changed. We look at people who need to change. People in government need to change. People on our streets that act that they need to change. Ultimately, if they meet Jesus, it's that transformation that will happen. Justice needs to work hand in hand with spiritual transformation. And one thing I would say before I move on to the next point is that God is not a buffet. Don't just pick and choose the bits that you want of God. If you treat him that way, you're going to miss his hand. I've seen that in my life. As I pick the worship bits, as I pick the Sunday morning bits, as I pick the friendship bits, as I pick the good bits, God is not a buffet. And he set out in his template, Isaiah 58, in Luke 4, and Micah 6, verse 8, is to act justly. That's his heart. And essentially he was saying, how can you expect me to show up if you ignore what is closest to my heart? Are we ignoring what's closest to the heart of God? Secondly, to act justly, but to love mercy. To love mercy. And I would put it this way. Which way do you lean? What's your posture in your life? Which way are you inclined? When things happen to you, when people say things to you, how are you inclined to act? How are you inclined to respond? And this speaks very much to our character and to our identity, to how we see ourselves. And I would put it this way, is we need to err on the side of love. We need to lean on the side of love. And I find when you err on the side of love, when you're inclined towards love, when you're inclined towards mercy, you naturally lean away from offense. You naturally lean away from irritation, from stress, from people's words. As you lean in towards love, you naturally lean away from those things. One of my many jobs, I used to work as an advocate, advocating for children who are in care. And we were kind of like solicitors, but within the social services environment. And we would speak up and be a voice for often for children and young people who weren't able to give their voice in a room or a legal framework full of adults and full of professionals and so on. And part of my job was to write complaints. I think when I left, I kind of totted up roughly how many complaints. And I think I made hundreds of complaints to social services. We did judicial reviews, we contacted directors, we were in touch with local ombudsmen in terms of trying to resolve situations for young people. And I wrote lots of complaints, and I found out what worked and what not. It's funny, isn't it, when we get angry as British people, we always say, oh, you're a disgrace, or I wouldn't let my dog do this. We have certain sort of phrases that we come back to. And when in the process of learning how to make a good complaint, I worked out very quickly, very early on, it was so beneficial, it's so important to err on the side of love. It sounds weird in a professional environment, it sounds odd in a sort of local authority sort of context, but I found when I took that principle, when I loved mercy, when I erred on the side of love, I was so much more effective in being able to find justice for the young people that I was working for. I found that when I wrote letters that were harsh, and some of them made you angry. Some of the injustice was infuriating, and it was so easy to just let it fly on paper to these people or directors or managers or whatever it was. But I found that as I erred on the side of love, as I was constructive and I wasn't destructive, I found it allowed space for people, as I gave people the benefit of the doubt, as I gave them mercy, I found it allowed more of a dialogue, it allowed a constructive resolution to take place. And sometimes I would read back on these, sometimes the complaint process would take many months. And about 6 months later, I would go back to the initial complaint. And I would read it, and I'm not tooting my own trumpet, but I would read it and I think, that was a good complaint. I think, well done, Daniel, because no one else is going to give you praise, are they, sometimes? So I thought, well done. That I would see how I could have gone a certain way, I could have got really angry, But instead, I put myself in their shoes. I understood why they may have made those decisions. I understood the context from which they were, and I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I showed mercy, and it allowed them to constructively resolve the problem. And I found that I got a good reputation for working with the people I should be complaining about. People wanted to resolve problems, all because I erred on the side of mercy, and I applied that principle into my professional life, as well as just my natural life as well. And when you love mercy, people's words and their actions, you know, there's things that really grate on you when people just throw stuff at you. They don't stick as much as they would do. It's like you cover yourself in this greasy grace, is how I describe it. And when people throw this stuff at you, it's harder to stick. Have you ever tried to stick sellotape on something, there's some butter there or oil or something, and you can't stick this piece of sellotape to this piece has got some grease on it? It's like that. When you err on the side of mercy, stress and offense and words that people say don't stick as much. Anyone get road rage in this room? Be honest, no one can see you on camera. Yeah, 1, 2, the rest of you are liars. It's true that, isn't it? How that instinctual situation will happen and you just launch at them. I found, as I've erred on the side of mercy, how many times have I done a quick one? Or have I made a mistake? Or I haven't seen someone, they've come out the blue and I've had to break or something like that. And it's funny how merciful we are with ourselves, aren't we? We give ourselves loads of grace. Oh, well, I did this because this happened. Or I didn't realize that was going to happen, so you excuse yourself, don't you? We're very graceful with ourselves, but with other people, we're not at all. And you find that on the roads more than anything. And I found, as I'm inclined towards love, as I'm inclined towards mercy, I don't experience road rage as much as I used to. Not those terribly an angry person behind the wheel, but those sorts of little things, as you err on the side of mercy, they filter through your life. And if Jesus did it, so must we. Jesus' prayer was, as he taught us how to pray, was to say, Father, forgive us, so that we can forgive. If we're not forgiving, if we're not erring on the side of mercy, erring on the side of love, we're spitting on his grace. We're squandering we're not using his grace. People aren't seeing his grace. Micah says to love mercy. God's default, his default is mercy. He will always fall back to mercy. Not judgment, not condemnation, which we've got a reputation for, which the church has developed a reputation for. We've moved away from that, but God's default is always mercy. Just last week, we celebrated he sent his son. He sent his most precious person in order to take the punishment, to take the retribution for someone else's actions. His default was mercy, and it becomes so much part of the story, we forget the reality of what they... Imagine sending your son to pay the punishment for someone else. That's what God did for us. Err on the side of mercy. As you err on the side of mercy, you see the context. As you err on the side of love and you err on the side of mercy, you see the good. And when you see the good, it's much harder to see the bad. So, act justly, love mercy, and the last one is to walk humbly. It's a funny one, this. We sort of equate humbleness when we've done something wrong. Now we've got to humble ourselves and say sorry. We've got to eat humble pie is what the expression is. And there's an event where we have to evidence humility. But it says here to walk humbly. It's a daily thing. It's something we live in, we live through. It's something we continually have around. It's not a switch that you flip on. There's a power and authority that comes with humility, which sounds almost contradictory. Jesus made himself low. It says he came not to be served, but to serve. He made himself, and we talked about this last week as well, he made himself beneath creation. He lowered himself underneath creation. He let himself be broken. Remember the eggs? He was the only one that allowed himself to be broken in order that he may lift us up, in order that he may bring us up. And we forget the nature of humility, of being able to walk humbly. In marriage, there's this thing about Men love to crow about it, don't they? Bring it up normally at some completely inappropriate moment about man's the head of the household, and they're in charge. And there's that philosophy that exists in society as well. But actually, what the Bible says is, men, love your wives as Christ loved the church. And the very example we have of how Christ loved the church was he came not to be served, but to serve. He lowered himself beneath us so he could lift us up. He allowed himself to be broken so that he could serve us and he could lift us up. And husbands, that's how you're supposed to love your wives. Not from a position of lordship, but from a position of serving, a position of lifting the other up. That's what love is. It all connects. Acting justly, loving mercy, walking humbly. And I always say this, and I know I've said this before, and I think sometimes this needs a bit of explaining. Humility, often our perception, our understanding of humility is grounded in what we've done wrong. It's grounded in, I've made a mistake, I have to humble myself, I'm rubbish, I've made a mistake, I'm a worm. That's the classic one, isn't it? And that's not humility. But that's become our perception of what humility is, because we have to humble ourselves, normally is what happens. Humility is simply knowing who you are. I'll say that again because it doesn't necessarily make sense. Humility is knowing who you are. It's knowing your place. It's knowing your purpose in life. It's knowing what you're good at in life. It's knowing your identity. It's knowing what your future is. But most importantly, it's knowing your source. Knowing who is your source. And that source is Jesus. And the thing is, pride opposes this. Pride says that I am my source. I am my own source. And it becomes a huge barrier to blessing. It becomes a huge barrier to being able to serve people. And I say that it can make complete sense now. The difference between humility and pride is saying I'm my source. Humility is knowing who you are, is saying God is my source. Have you ever tried to give a British person something? Have you ever tried to be nice to someone, especially in this culture? It happens in every other culture as well. You ever been at a restaurant and tried to pay for the meal? You know exactly what I'm talking about, don't you? There's this argument, there's this wrestling that goes on, and it's not based out of compassion, it's not based out of generosity, it's not based out of giving. If we're truly honest with ourselves, it's we don't want to be we feel uncomfortable being on the position of receiving. We want to be the person providing. We want to be the person who's able to give, who's able to pay for that bill. And we see it when we hand out free stuff. I can see the wall in people is that pride, that not wanting to be the charity, not wanting to be in receiving of that act of kindness. And we are a huge barrier to what God has made us, to what God has wanted us to be. And it's a lack of humility. It's that I am my source. It's not being comfortable. Pride says, I'm okay, I'm enough. Humility says, I'm enough because of God. And it's being comfortable with that. And with that comes an assurance, comes a confidence, which almost seems contradictory when it comes to humility. And it's not an earthly confidence, it's a confidence that comes in God. So actually with humility, there's a confidence and there's an assuredness that comes because your source is based in God. Your source is based in your identity of who God has made you to be, of the future God has laid out for you. That's humility. And Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 5, if you don't know much about Peter, Peter was probably known as being the most prideful, arrogant apostle. He's talked about how he's going to sit at the right hand of God. He talked about how he was the greatest apostle. He was always putting himself up there when they were jostling around for who was the best. He got told the church was going to be built upon him. So he was pretty full of himself. And as we read 1 Peter chapter 5, as he came to the end, towards the end of his life, he said, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 5, I've just lost. He said, all of you, clothe yourselves with humility. The person who's gone from being the most prideful, arrogant apostle, I'm the man, I'm the most gifted person, I'm the one who's going to lead this rabble to once Jesus goes. At the end of his life, he came to the conclusion, and he was giving advice saying, clothe yourselves in humility. Now, you all generally wear clothes all the time. You put them on, and there's something that a part of you that you walk in. Peter was saying, live in humility. clothe yourself in humility. And he says, because God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves under God's hand that he may lift you up in due time. Peter, who was rooted in pride, said, clothe yourselves in humility. Know God as your source. It's like a fragrance. It's something that sits on you. When you make a bacon sandwich in the morning, it tastes great and you have a wonderful 10 minutes eating your bacon sandwich, and then you walk out the house and then you smell of bacon the rest of the day, don't you? Smell of that grease pan. You can't smell it. You're standing in a line at the supermarket, your family's house, or whatever it is, smelling of bacon, and you can't smell of bacon. And you've been around people who's had a full English breakfast that morning, and they just smell of full English breakfast. Humility is like that in a nice way. Humility is like that. It gives off a smell, it gives off an odor that people can see. As you act justly, as you love mercy, as you walk humbly. It's not a switch. It's not something you just suddenly have to show. It's something you carry, it's something you wear, and it's something you walk in as well. And again, in Colossians chapter 3, verse 12, it says, and this is Paul saying, another apostle, he's saying, as God's people, holy and who are loved, clothe yourself with compassion. We've talked about that, about acting justly. Social justice is intentional compassion. Clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, love, mercy, and humility. It's littered throughout the Bible, this template for living well. Acting justly, erring in love and mercy, walking humbly. Humility is the displacement of self, and it's the enthronement of God in our lives. There are many philosophies about emptying yourself and getting rid of all stuff and desires and that sort of stuff. But unless you fill that void with God, your heart will never truly be transformed. Justice has to be tied with spiritual transformation. Otherwise, it's just good stuff. And people's human nature comes flooding back in again. If you know God, you discover yourself. Therefore, walk in humility. As you give yourself, you find yourself sanctified. That's why it talks about the walk of humility being the walk of holiness. So, as I wrap up and we come back to, I told you I was going to throw lots of scriptures at you. Micah chapter 6, verse 8, the template God set out for living. The template Jesus came back to when he announced himself to the world. The template that Peter found and learnt the hard way at the end of his life as he was giving advice and wisdom to the churches that had been established. The template that Paul had discovered was this: to act justly. This is what God requires of us: to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. When it all comes down to it, that is the template for living well in our lives. And I was thinking about how to finish today. And there are lots of ways I could finish. But I think as a church, as a people, we need to learn how to respond to God. Often when people talk and give messages, you're challenged, you're stretched, you're provoked. And that's not necessarily just a person speaking well. That's not necessarily just a point that you've never thought about before. That is the little voice of God just nudging you. As we talked about last week, like when you waited for the Amazon, you hear a knock at the door, you're not quite sure if that's God. Is that God? It seems a bit quiet, but we need to be a people who respond to God's voice. Not affected by the music, not affected by the worship, not affected by how good or not good the talk is on a Sunday morning, not affected necessarily by the group of people. When we hear that voice, when we hear that little voice, to be able to respond to that, to learn to respond to that, to open ourselves up to that today. And there may be some points as we've gone through some of the verses and the messages today where you just felt a bit challenged. You just felt, as I describe it, nudged, just poked, just pushed. And that's not me. That's not the words that I've read necessarily. That's God's little voice just nudging, just knocking at your heart. And I want to do an anti-ministry session today. In that some of you who are listening who have heard that nudge. Some of you have heard last week, the week before, have heard that little challenge, that little inside of your heart. And that's God speaking. But sometimes we feel a real sense of we've got to do it. Sometimes it's just, I think I should do that. Something grabbing our attention. That's us learning to hear God's voice. And so I'm not going to do anything this morning, but I know that over the last few weeks, this week in particular as well, some of you have felt that nudge. And I'm going to let you go away, and I'm going to let you just respond to that nudge in your own way, to respond to that nudge, to communicate with God, and to respond to that. Exactly as, was it John Huss that would say, doubt must be cast on if our lives are fruitless. Profession must be followed by deeds of charity. It's calling for response. It's calling to be able to hear that voice and to be able to respond to it. So I'm not going to pray. We're not going to wait, because God's already spoken. In many of you, I think, that are listening this morning. So I'm going to read the blessing. I'll pray at the end of it. But I'm going to encourage you guys to respond to those little nudges that maybe, once you ignore those nudges, they're still there. You can come back to those anytime you want. John Wimber said that old orders are good orders. Unless you hear anything new, that order that God's placed inside your heart is still there. It's still relevant. So, for those of you who are listening, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. And God, may you give us the courage, and may you give us ears to hear your voice and eyes to see where you're moving in our lives. And give us the courage to take a risk and to respond to you, Lord, to respond to those little nudges, those voices in our lives. So God bless you as you go forth this week, as you act justly, as you love mercy, and as you walk humbly. Go and live well, and we will see you next week. A bit of an advert for next week as well. I would encourage you to watch it live next week on the live stream. We're going to be, I know randomly I like to give stuff away. I'm going to try and do it online as well. It will work better if everyone's watching live. If you've got kids, have them watch as well. There'll be stuff in there for them. Stuff in there I'm going to be giving away as well. So I'm going to take a bit of a risk. I'm going to take a bit of an experiment. I'm going to try. So I'm going to be giving some stuff away next week as well, as part of carrying on this series as well. So do tune in. Do watch live if you can. And it may be worth your while. But in the meantime, go forward, have a good week, and we'll see you soon. God bless.